She was rescued once by Mafia boss, but now he wants her heart. Claire sat stiffly in the passenger seat of Vincent's black car as it rolled to a slow stop along Lakeshore Drive. The city lights reflected off the quiet water beside them, but she barely noticed. Her hands shook inside the borrowed coat he had placed on her shoulders earlier, the fabric still warm from his touch. She had spent the whole day serving tables, yet nothing had drained her as much as the last 5 minutes of this ride. Vincent's gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead, his voice low and steady as he told her that Thomas, the man who had been following her for weeks, was planning something dangerous. Claire felt her throat tighten. She had known something was off, but hearing it from him made it real. She turned toward Vincent, her voice unsteady. "What do I owe you for helping me?" He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Have dinner with me." Claire blinked, confused. Of all the answers she expected, this was not one. A powerful man like him could ask for anything, yet he asked for something that sounded almost normal. Why would Chicago's most feared underground figure want something as simple as dinner? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Another one drops tomorrow. A cold November night hung heavy over the Chicago Riverwalk as Claire stepped out of the morning cup. Her legs ached from the double shift. She rubbed her hands together, wishing she had remembered gloves. Closing time always left her drained, but tonight felt heavier than usual. The wind carried that sharp bite that slipped under clothing and settled against the skin. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and began the long walk toward Union Station. She hated this route. The underpass near the station was always too dark, too empty, and lined with concrete that echoed every footstep. But it was the fastest way home, and the last train toward Bridgeport would not wait for her. She reminded herself she had taken this path 100 times. She told herself nothing would happen. She needed the extra tips from her shift, and she needed to get home to Thomas, who was already asleep after staying late at his high school project workshop. Her footsteps slowed the moment she entered the underpass. Something felt wrong. It wasn't the usual silence. It was the quiet that made the skin at the back of her neck tighten. She walked faster, gripping her bag. A small sound echoed behind her, soft but close. She didn't turn at first. She hoped she was imagining it. But when she finally glanced over her shoulder, she saw 3 men. They trailed her with slow, deliberate steps. Their shadows stretched across the concrete walls. Her pulse kicked up. She crossed to the other side of the walkway, but they mirrored her. She reached for her phone, but her gloves made it harder. She hurried forward until a hand wrapped around her arm and yanked her back. Her breath hitched as another man stepped in front of her. She opened her mouth to shout, but one of them covered it. The underpass suddenly felt colder. A firm voice echoed from behind her, sharp enough to cut through their taunts. "Let her go." The grip on her arm loosened, not much, but enough for her to breathe again. The men turned. Claire turned with them. A tall man stepped out from the shadows as though he had been standing there the entire time. His black coat moved slightly in the wind, and the streetlight above him revealed a strong jawline, dark hair, and eyes that held nothing soft. He walked with complete control, each step steady and certain. There was no fear in him, no hesitation. The 3 men stiffened at the sight of him. One of them whispered the name Vincent. Everything shifted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for anything. He simply looked at them and repeated, calmer this time, "Leave." They backed away immediately. No arguments. No threats. They dropped their bravado like someone had pulled the ground out from under them and disappeared toward the station without another word. Claire stood frozen. Her heart hammered so loud she could hear it in her ears. Vincent stepped closer, but not too close. His gaze moved from her face down to the arm that still trembled. "You're hurt." She shook her head. "No. Just scared." His coat came off his shoulders in one fluid motion before she could protest. He wrapped it around her without touching her, making sure it covered her completely. "Let me get you home," he said. She wanted to argue. She wanted to insist she was fine. But her legs felt weak, and the cold had settled deep inside her. She nodded once. His black car waited near the street entrance. The inside felt warm, almost too warm after the cold underpass. Vincent drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other steady on the armrest. She studied him from the corner of her eye. He didn't look at her. His jaw was tight, his focus locked on the road. When they reached her building in Bridgeport, he parked without pulling away. "You're safe now," he said. She thanked him, stepped out with his coat still around her shoulders, and watched his car leave. She assumed that was the end. A strange, frightening night fixed by a stranger she would never see again. But Vincent did not forget her. In the weeks after that night, he found himself thinking about the way she had looked at him, startled but not judgmental, frightened but still strong. She hadn't begged. She hadn't collapsed. She had simply tried to survive. Most people showed him fear. Claire showed something different. Something real. He tried to push the memory aside. He had larger problems, heavier responsibilities, and a city full of people who wanted something from him. But whenever he passed through 18th Street on late-night drives, he noticed the small coffee shop lit up against the dark sidewalks. The Morning Cup. Her workplace. At first, he told himself his route simply shifted. Then he admitted the truth. He was looking for her. He saw her through the windows sometimes, laughing with regulars, carrying 3 plates at once, helping an older man fix his coat zipper, greeting each customer with a smile that made the tired place feel lighter. He learned her name only months later, when he overheard someone call out to her. Claire. He learned more from watching her than from any file. She raised Thomas alone, a responsibility she never complained about. Her parents had died in a crash on the Kennedy Expressway when she was still a teenager, leaving her with only a younger brother and a world she had to manage on her own. Yet she kept moving. She worked double shifts. She saved every dollar. She protected her brother with quiet loyalty. Hard life or not, she still managed to give kindness freely, holding doors for strangers, slipping extra creamer cups to old customers, leaving a free sandwich for the homeless man who hovered near the shop's side entrance. She moved through her days with a gentle strength. A strength Vincent couldn't forget. To him, she became the single peaceful thing in a world built on tension. She didn't know him. She didn't fear him. She didn't want anything from him. And that alone made her unforgettable. Claire stood in front of the elevator doors at the Witt Hotel, trying not to tug nervously at the hem of a simple black dress. It wasn't new. It wasn't fashionable. It was the only thing she owned that felt close to appropriate for a rooftop restaurant. The elevator chimed, and the doors opened to a soft glow of lights, quiet music, and a view of the Chicago Theater marquee glowing like a warm beacon below. Wealthy diners filled the space, people who didn't flinch at overpriced menus or crisp linen tablecloths. Claire felt her stomach twist. She didn't belong here. She shouldn't even be here. Then she saw him. Vincent stood near the edge of the rooftop, looking over the city like he was deciding which direction the night would bend. He wore a suit that fit him too perfectly, his presence unmistakable even among people who lived comfortably above ground-level problems. When he noticed her, something in his face softened. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she answered, though her voice came out smaller than intended. He walked her to a table near the railing, away from the noise. She tried to ignore the stares from nearby patrons, the kind of curious glances meant to place who she was and why she was with him. Her cheeks warmed. "You don't have to feel uncomfortable," Vincent said quietly as he pulled out her chair. She gave a tight laugh. "I'm sitting on a rooftop surrounded by people who probably order wine more expensive than my rent. I think discomfort is part of the package." He didn't smile often, but her honesty tugged a small one out of him. "If it helps, I didn't bring you here for any of that." She looked up. "Then why?" "Because I wanted to hear your voice when it isn't shaking in fear." The words hit her harder than she expected. She lowered her eyes to the menu simply to steady herself. Throughout dinner, he surprised her. He asked real questions, not idle ones to fill silence. He wanted to know about Thomas, about how he loved drawing buildings more than playing sports, about how he dreamed of designing something iconic one day. Vincent listened with a focus that made her feel seen rather than examined. He asked about her fire escape garden too, and she told him how she planted herbs in old coffee cans and tomato vines in a cracked plastic tub she found behind the shop. She explained how the narrow space behind her apartment felt like a secret pocket of calm, a place where she could breathe after long shifts. He listened to all of it, even details she thought were too small to matter. When she mentioned the diner regulars, the truck driver who always tipped in coins, the nurse who came in after graveyard shifts, the quiet man who ordered tea with 2 sugars, Vincent asked questions about each one, as if learning her world piece by piece helped him understand her better. She left the restaurant that night confused by how natural the conversation had felt. This man was supposed to be untouchable, distant, dangerous. Yet he walked her to the elevator like she was someone important, someone he genuinely wanted to spend time with. When they parted, he didn't push for anything more. "Dinner again?" he asked simply. She hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe." The second dinner came 2 weeks later. This time at Gibson's Steakhouse on Rush Street, a place filled with loud laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of grilled steaks. She felt less out of place here, though the waitstaff still treated Vincent with an attention that hinted at something beyond money. Afterward, they walked through Millennium Park. The bean reflected the city lights, bending the skyline into a shimmering curve. Claire stared at it, hugging her arms against the cool night breeze. "You're quiet tonight," Vincent said beside her. She looked at their reflection in the metal sculpture, her in a simple coat, him standing tall beside her, the difference between their worlds impossible to miss. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. He paused. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone cold. Someone who just exists above everything." "And now?" She met his eyes. "Now I think you choose when to be that person." A faint flicker crossed his face, almost like he wasn't sure how to respond. "I'm different around you," he admitted. "I don't know why yet." They continued walking, the silence between them no longer heavy, just comfortable. The third dinner happened in Little Italy on a warm spring evening. The restaurant was small, family-run, with framed photographs on the walls and a smell of fresh pasta drifting through the air. It seemed simple at first, but she noticed things almost immediately. The way the host straightened up the moment Vincent walked in. The way customers turned subtly, whispering among themselves. The way a young man at a corner table stood to greet Vincent even though Vincent offered nothing more than a nod. Claire's fork paused over her plate. She saw people's reactions. Their respect. Their nervousness. Their awareness. This wasn't the polite attention of staff admiring a wealthy customer. This was something deeper, something built from influence and history. She leaned slightly forward. "What kind of person are you to them?" Vincent didn't answer right away. He cut a piece of his food with quiet precision, then spoke with calm honesty. "Someone they don't want to disappoint." That was the moment her understanding deepened. Not fully. Not enough to grasp the weight of his world. But she felt the edges of it. She sensed that the man sitting across from her carried responsibilities she couldn't imagine, and respect that came from more than charm or money. As they walked back to his car, she saw another moment, a stranger stepping aside, not out of politeness, but because Vincent was approaching. It wasn't fear. It wasn't admiration. It was recognition. When he opened the car door for her, she looked up at him. "You live in a very different world from mine," she said softly. He held her gaze. "Yes. But you keep stepping into mine." "Yes." "Why?" A small breath escaped him, almost like he'd been holding it for days. "Because you make it feel like there's another way to live." She didn't know how to answer that. She didn't know if she wanted to. But she knew one thing as she got inside the car. She would see him again. Summer settled over Chicago with thick, warm evenings that clung to the skin. By then, their dinners were no longer rare invitations. They had become a rhythm. Once a week, sometimes twice if Vincent finished his meetings early. Claire looked forward to them in a way she tried not to analyze too deeply. He never asked for anything in return. He never crossed lines. He simply showed up, listened, walked beside her, and let her see pieces of a world most people only talked about in hushed tones. One warm June night, he took her to Buckingham Fountain. Crowds gathered nearby to watch the water leap into the air in bright colors. The spray caught the wind and drifted lightly onto their skin. Claire watched families take photos, teenagers laugh, couples whisper. All normal, all human, all uncomplicated. Vincent stood slightly behind her, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way she rarely saw. For a moment, he didn't look like a man with enemies or obligations. He just looked like someone who had found a pause in a life full of noise. "Do you come here often?" she asked. "Not really," he said. "But I figured you might like the view." She did. The dancing colors reflected on the water like shifting fragments of light. She turned to say thanks, but he was already watching her with an unreadable expression. After a long, quiet moment, he spoke. "Men like me don't retire," he said. "We either die or lose everything." The words hit her like a sudden cold wind. She faced him fully. Why are you telling me that now? He held her gaze. Because you deserve honesty. And because I don't want you thinking this is simple. Claire let out a slow breath. Maybe reality can change. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. You believe that? I have to. She looked out at the fountain again. If life stayed the same forever, people like me and my brother would never stand a chance. Something softened in him at the mention of Thomas. Which made sense, because she had begun noticing things. Small things, at first. Then bigger ones. The Morning Cup had been struggling. Slow months, old equipment, a letter from the city about overdue taxes. Claire knew the owner had been terrified of shutting down. But one morning, the owner came in with a stunned expression, waving a receipt that showed the taxes paid in full. No explanation. No signature. Just handled. Weeks later, Thomas mentioned that a well-known architectural firm emailed him out of nowhere, offering a spot in a summer mentorship program. He hadn't applied. Their message said his high school instructor recommended him, but when Claire checked, the instructor had no idea. Someone else had opened that door. Then, in her apartment building, the heating system that had rattled and clanked for 2 winters suddenly worked perfectly. The landlord claimed he found someone willing to fix it cheap. Claire knew that landlord barely fixed leaks, much less expensive systems. These were not coincidences. One evening after dinner, she stopped him outside her building. You're doing things, she said. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. Her voice held more weight than anger. You don't have to save everyone connected to me. He looked down at her, calm but serious. I'm not saving everyone. Really? I'm saving the people who matter to someone who matters to me. She felt her heart shake in her chest. She had no answer ready. He didn't wait for one. He touched her shoulder lightly, so lightly she wasn't sure it counted as a touch, and then walked away. Their connection didn't explode. It didn't rush. It grew in these soft, painful moments that left her unsteady long after he left. By August, the heat clung to the city like a heavy blanket. One night, near midnight, she heard a quiet knock on her studio apartment door. Her first thought was Thomas, but he was at a friend's house working on a project. When she opened the door, Vincent stood there, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled, like he had been pacing before he came. Is something wrong? She asked. No, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. Can I come in? She stepped aside. He entered slowly, looking around as if absorbing every detail. Her studio was tiny, one room with a bed by the window, a second-hand bookshelf filled with dog-eared novels, small plants in mismatched pots lining the sill, and string lights she kept on because they made the place feel warm. The faint smell of cinnamon hung in the air from a candle she had lit earlier. It wasn't much, but it was home. You always imagined it bigger, she joked lightly. His eyes softened. No. It looks like you. She wasn't sure what that meant, but the way he said it made her chest flutter. She made coffee because it felt like the right thing to do, but neither of them touched it. They sat on opposite ends of the small couch, shadows from the streetlight stretching across the floor. Outside, a train rumbled past in the distance. For a long time, they didn't speak. Why did you come tonight? She finally asked. I needed to clear my head. From what? He exhaled. You. Her breath caught. He shifted slightly, elbows resting on his knees. I keep telling myself to stay away. That you deserve someone with a quiet life. Someone who doesn't make headlines or enemies. But every time I try to step back, I end up here. Outside your door. Inside your world. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She swallowed. Can I ask you something? He nodded. What do you want? The question hung in the warm room, heavy and impossible to ignore. Vincent didn't look away. He didn't brace or hide behind careful words. He spoke with raw honesty she had never heard from him before. I want you, he said softly. Not for a moment. Not for a season. I want every second I can have. I want to be the person you turn to when your day goes wrong, and the one you look for when things go right. I want you in my thoughts, in my future, in ways I can't even put into words. Claire felt the truth of it settle deep inside her. He wasn't asking for permission. He was confessing something he had been holding back for months. And she realized she felt the same. Claire didn't move at first. His confession settled between them like something fragile, something that might vanish if she breathed too hard. Vincent sat there with every guard lowered, every defense stripped away, waiting for her to speak. She reached out slowly and took his hands. His fingers were warm, tense, unsure. She held them firmly. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" she asked. He blinked, startled by her calm. She didn't wait for him to guess. "I see a man who stepped into a dark underpass because he heard a woman cry for help. I see someone who makes sure the servers at every restaurant get treated with respect. Someone who stops to talk to the homeless man outside your place on Taylor Street and brings him real meals instead of leftovers." He shook his head. "Claire. I'm not finished." Her voice stayed gentle but steady. "I see someone who takes care of people quietly, without expecting anything back. Someone who carries burdens most people couldn't handle for one day." His jaw tightened. "You don't know everything I've done." She squeezed his hands. "I know you're a good man trying to survive in a difficult world." For a moment, he closed his eyes, like her words cut deeper than anything else. When he opened them, something had changed. The space between them felt charged, warmer, filled with everything they'd been holding back for months. She leaned closer. The kiss happened naturally. No hesitation, no second guessing. His hands moved to her face as if he'd been waiting forever to touch her. Her fingers curled into his shirt. The room felt too small to hold the intensity they had been suppressing for so long. His restraint broke first, then hers, and the connection that sparked in the underpass 3 years ago finally ignited without apology. When they pulled away, breathless, neither spoke for a long moment. Words felt too small for the shift that had just taken place. The following weeks unfolded with a different energy. They still had dinners, but they also had quiet mornings, stolen moments, and conversations that lasted long past midnight. He opened up about decisions he regretted, situations he couldn't walk away from without putting others at risk. She told him about her dreams, small ones, like owning a bigger bookshelf, and bigger ones, like wanting a life that didn't depend on double shifts. They talked about danger, about choices, about consequences neither of them could ignore. He didn't hide the truth of his world. She didn't turn away from it. One night, he brought her to his penthouse overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed Chicago stretched out in a blanket of glittering lights. The skyline glowed, the lake gleamed in the distance, and the world below looked quiet from so high up. Claire stood at the glass, her reflection faint against the view. Vincent walked up behind her, sliding one arm carefully around her waist. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So are you," he said, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. She turned in his arms, searching his face. "Leave with me. Just leave." The request wasn't impulsive. It came from fear, love, and the feeling that the world around him would swallow him whole if he didn't step away soon. Vincent cupped her cheek. "Running creates more danger. If I disappear, people assume weakness. They start fighting for pieces of what I built. That brings chaos. It puts the people close to me at risk. Including you." Her throat tightened. "So what? You stay trapped forever?" "No," he said softly. "I've been thinking about a way out. A real one." She waited. He brushed his thumb across her skin, slow and deliberate. "But before I take that risk, I need to know I'm not deciding alone." She didn't hesitate. "Not this time. I choose you, Vincent. Whatever that means." Something fierce, almost painful, flashed through his eyes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only thing anchoring him to a future he hadn't dared to picture. Soon after, he began the long process of reshaping his world. He held a meeting at Carmelo's, a quiet restaurant tucked between old brick buildings. A small group of his closest associates gathered around a private table, their faces serious as Vincent laid out his plan, shifting operations into legitimate businesses, dissolving dangerous ties, stepping back from roles that demanded blood rather than strategy. Some resisted. Some were confused. But they listened, because his voice carried authority built over years. Later, he met with his attorney at the Signature Lounge on the 96th floor of the John Hancock Center. The city stretched out beneath them in every direction, lights flickering like tiny sparks. The attorney leaned forward, voice low but urgent. "This isn't simple. You've made powerful moves. You've also made powerful enemies. If you change course now, you'll be exposed. Are you sure? Vincent stared out at the skyline. He thought of Claire's hands holding his. Her voice telling him he was good. Her belief in him when he had none left for himself. I'm taking the only risk that matters, he said. The attorney sat back, studying him with a mixture of disbelief and respect. For the first time in his life, Vincent wasn't acting for survival, or control, or reputation. He was acting for love. And Claire felt it every time he looked at her, every time he chose honesty over secrecy, every time he stepped closer to a life he never believed he could claim. They didn't pretend everything would be easy. They didn't pretend the danger was gone. But they held on to each other through every setback, every long night, every whispered fear. Their worlds hadn't merged, they were still uneven, still complicated, but the walls between them had cracked open. Fallen, piece by piece. Not with force. Not with chaos. But with choice. With trust. With a kiss that changed everything. A full year passed, not quickly, not slowly, just steadily, the way time moves when life finally has space to breathe. Claire and Vincent found themselves learning how to share a world that neither of them had ever expected. Their relationship didn't explode or rush forward. It settled into them, becoming a constant that felt earned. Claire kept her job at the Morning Cup, no matter how many times Vincent tried to convince her to step away and focus on her dreams. Every time, she gave him the same soft but firm answer, I need to be my own person. Not just yours. He never argued after that. He only nodded, accepting that her independence wasn't a wall between them. It was part of what made her who she was. Their Sundays became their anchor. They wandered through Wicker Park's farmer's market, fingers brushing over late summer peaches or winter apples, depending on the season. Vendors started greeting them by name. Vincent always carried the bags despite her protests. Sometimes he'd pause at a stand to quietly slip the owner extra cash if business looked slow, doing it so discreetly that Claire caught it only because she'd learned to know his body language by heart. They walked through Lincoln Park Zoo on warm afternoons, drifting between the exhibits without any real agenda. Families moved around them. Kids pointed at giraffes, couples took photos near the lion enclosure, and Vincent, once feared in half the city, stood beside Claire with his arms in his pockets, listening more to her than to the noises around them. She'd talk about recipes she wanted to test, books she was reading, or things she noticed in customers. He absorbed every word like each one was proof that he still had a place in her life. What meant the most to her wasn't the restaurants he took her to or the doors that opened when he walked into a room. It was the quiet nights in her apartment, cooking simple meals together, sitting on her old couch, talking until midnight. Those evenings carried a softness nothing else matched. The expensive spaces were beautiful, but her tiny home with its plants and thrift store furniture held their real connection. Thomas graduated from DePaul that spring, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit yet and a grin that absolutely did. Claire cried through the ceremony. Afterwards, he shook Vincent's hand with surprising seriousness. I know you care about her, he said quietly. So just, don't hurt her. Vincent didn't make promises he couldn't keep, but he answered with something better. You have my word that she's the one person I'll always protect, no matter what. Thomas believed him. Something in the honesty of Vincent's expression left no room for doubt. While their personal life grew steadier, Vincent's business world shifted in ways that took effort every single day. He invested heavily in legitimate ventures, restaurants, bakeries, event spaces, expanding slowly but intentionally. He spent late nights reviewing contracts, meeting with accountants, making decisions that kept pushing him toward the future he had promised her. The old world he came from didn't let go easily. People tested him, doubted him, tried to pull him back to where he'd once stood. He didn't hide this from Claire. Some nights he came to her place quiet, weighed down, taking a moment before speaking. But she sat with him, listening, reminding him of the progress he'd made, the man he was shaping himself into. There were challenges, threats whispered from the past, tension from former associates who didn't appreciate his shift, financial pushback from people whose power relied on the darker paths he was abandoning. Claire never asked for details, but she felt the strain in the way he sometimes held her hand a little tighter, or pressed a kiss to her forehead as if anchoring himself. Instead of fear, she met those moments with steady loyalty. We face things together, she would say. And every time, he answered with a quiet, grateful breath. They handled each obstacle not by pretending danger didn't exist, but by choosing each other despite it. Arguments happened, of course, about her long shifts, about his long nights, about the ways they came from different worlds, but every disagreement ended with honest conversation rather than distance. Meanwhile, Claire's dream grew from a faint idea to a plan with shape and weight. She talked more openly about opening her own restaurant, something small, warm, infused with the comfort she'd always loved offering people. Vincent encouraged her gently, never pushing. He helped her research locations, but she insisted on doing the work herself. "I want this to be mine," she told him. "Built from my hands, not your influence." He respected that completely. He admired it, even. By the end of that year, their life wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had routines, shared memories, and a rhythm that felt natural. They learned each other's moods, preferences, fears. Vincent discovered that Claire hummed while cooking without realizing it. Claire learned that Vincent slept better when her hand rested near his heart. They grew not by dramatic gestures but by steady presence. Every challenge from his past that reached forward only strengthened the bond they had. Every moment she struggled with her dream only made him want to support her more. They weren't trying to create an illusion of peace, they were building a life that could stand, even when pieces shook. By the time winter rolled back into the city, they stood side by side with a confidence neither had known before. Not because their world was easy, but because they had chosen to cross it together. Their love wasn't a whirlwind, it was a foundation. Stronger because it had been tested. Steadier because it was chosen every single day. The night Vincent chose for the moment felt like something the city had been holding for them. Not dramatic, not loud, just calm. A clear sky, a soft breeze from the river, and a sense of quiet that settled around them as they walked along the river walk. It was the place where everything had shifted a year earlier, though neither of them had understood it back then. Tonight, the lights reflected in long lines over the dark water, and boats drifted by with low hums, creating gentle ripples that glowed under the lamps. Claire held his arm loosely, her fingers brushing the inside of his elbow. She wasn't suspicious, not really, just aware that he had been quiet all day. Not troubled, just focused, almost introspective. Vincent never hid his tension well, and this wasn't tension. It was something softer, something he was carrying carefully, as if afraid it might spill before the time was right. He stopped at the exact stretch of railing where they had stood on that night when he'd insisted on driving her home because a stranger might have meant her harm. She remembered the heaviness of fear, the uncertainty, the strange comfort she'd felt near him even then. Now, as she looked at him under the glow of the lamps, the memory felt distant, like it belonged to people who didn't yet know what love could become. Vincent rested his hands on the railing for a moment, letting out a slow breath. "Claire," he said softly, turning toward her. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you for a long time." Before she could respond, he reached into his coat. Her heart stuttered once, a quiet shock moving through her body when she saw the small box in his hand. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't need to. The raw emotion in his eyes said more than any posed gesture ever could. He opened the box, revealing a ring that wasn't flashy but carried a simple, elegant beauty. Exactly the kind she would have chosen for herself. His voice came low, thick with sincerity. "I thought I was saving you," he said. "But the truth is, you saved me." Her breath caught. The world around them faded until only his words existed. "I walked around for years thinking strength meant carrying everything alone," he continued. "Making choices that kept me alive but kept me empty too. And then you showed up with your stubborn kindness, your honesty, your refusal to let me hide behind the life I used to live. You taught me that love isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing a person can have." Claire's vision blurred. She blinked, but the tears kept gathering. She didn't reach for them. She let them fall. Vincent swallowed once, steadying himself. "I won't lie to you," he said. "I'm not out yet. It'll take time. There are things I still need to walk away from, and I'm doing it piece by piece. But I'm getting there. Because of you. Because you made me want a future that isn't built on fear or power." His hand shook slightly as he held the ring for her, a rare glimpse of vulnerability that tightened her chest. "I want a life where I'm just a man who owns some restaurants. A man who takes walks with his wife. A man who comes home to you every night, knowing you're safe, knowing we built something honest." Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. Her knees felt weak. She could hear the city moving around them, distant laughter, a boat horn, the rumble of passing taxis, but none of it touched her. Everything narrowed to the man holding his heart out in the simplest, most profound way. She lowered her hand, her voice trembling. "Vincent," she whispered, Yes. The word came out broken. She tried again, stronger. 1,000 times yes. The sound he made was barely audible, like a breath he had been holding for a year finally leaving his body. He took her left hand with a tenderness that made her tears fall harder. The ring slid onto her finger with perfect ease, as though it had been meant for her all along. Claire stared at it for a heartbeat. Not because of the jewel, but because of what it meant. It was a promise of the future they had fought for in quiet ways every day. When she looked up, Vincent was already watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before, hope without fear. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his. His hands came around her waist, pulling her into him with a sense of certainty that felt like home. Around them, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, people walking past, taxis gliding by, a cyclist ringing a small bell as he sped along the river. The world moved, but none of it broke their moment. To them, it felt as if time paused. Just for a breath. Just long enough for them to recognize how far they'd come from that night when she was scared, and he was a stranger trying to figure out why he cared. Claire laughed through her tears, and Vincent kissed the side of her head, holding her as if anchoring himself to something real and permanent. They stayed on the riverwalk for a long time, not talking, simply breathing together as the lights shimmered over the water. No rush. No fear. No expectations. Just the quiet truth of two lives choosing each other completely. In that space, they weren't separate worlds colliding anymore. They were one life forming, steady, hopeful, strong. The years after the proposal didn't unfold in a flawless, magical way. They unfolded like real life, messy at times, full of hurdles, full of growth. There were days when everything felt easy, and days when the past tried to claw its way back into the present. But the difference was that they faced it all as a team, never again as two people trying to survive on their own. Vincent worked day and night to shift his businesses into clean, transparent operations. It wasn't simple. Some people tried to pull him back into the old world, reminding him of debts, alliances, and threats that once ruled his life. He pushed forward anyway, determined to prove, to Claire, to himself, that he could build something honest. By the second year, he owned several restaurants under his name, known not for their ties to anything shadowy but for their quality, their community support, and the respectful way he treated his staff. Investors who once feared association with him now approached him with genuine interest. Claire's dream grew alongside his. She spent late nights sketching layouts, writing menu ideas, visiting small cafes for inspiration. Vincent offered to fund everything, but she insisted on building it with her own hands, her own pace. He respected that, stepping in only where she allowed, permits, negotiations, design help when she asked. They worked side by side without either one overshadowing the other. The day Dawson's opened in Andersonville, a crowd gathered even before the doors unlocked. The space looked exactly like the picture she carried in her heart for years. Soft, warm light suspended over wooden tables, mismatched, comfortable chairs she collected from thrift stores, a chalkboard menu with daily specials written in her own handwriting. The smell of fresh bread and simmering herbs flowed from the kitchen, greeting every visitor like a hug. People stepped inside and instantly felt welcomed, as if the place recognized them. Claire stood behind the counter that first morning, wearing an apron with her name embroidered by one of her old co-workers from the Morning Cup. Vincent stood beside her with a quiet pride he didn't try to hide. When the first customer walked in, Claire's hands trembled just a little. But Vincent touched her back lightly, grounding her. She gave the customer a warm smile that never left her face for the rest of the day. Their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. They woke up each morning to the smell of coffee he brewed before she got out of bed. He liked to watch her take the first sip, always with half-closed eyes, as if savoring something beyond the drink. Evenings often ended with long walks through their neighborhood, sometimes stopping at a park bench, sometimes wandering aimlessly, just talking about their day. Sundays were for gardening in the small patch behind their home. Claire planted tomatoes, basil, and roses. Vincent claimed he knew nothing about plants, yet he always found a reason to kneel beside her and help. Thomas visited regularly, not as the boy she once protected but as the man he became, an architect with steady work, confidence, and a fiancée he adored. They often stayed for dinner, filling the house with laughter and loud conversations. Vincent and Thomas shared a bond no one expected. Thomas teased Vincent about his age, and Vincent pretended to be offended, though he enjoyed every moment of it. In springtime, Vincent started coaching a little league team in their neighborhood. At first, Claire laughed, imagining him trying to keep a group of energetic kids under control. But he took to it with surprising patience. Parents appreciated his dedication. The kids adored him. On game days, Claire sat in the bleachers cheering for all the players, not just his team. Watching Vincent help a child adjust their stance or tie their shoelaces showed her a side of him only she had glimpsed before, gentle, steady, protective in ways that had nothing to do with power. As the years passed, Dawson's became a gathering place. People celebrated birthdays there, held small poetry nights, stopped by for morning pastries from the bakery section Claire eventually added. She learned customers' stories. They trusted her with their joys, their grief, their routines. The restaurant felt alive, breathing warmth into the neighborhood. Life was not without tests. Some months were financially tight. Old threats tried to resurface, though briefly. There were disagreements, exhaustion, moments where dreams felt heavier than expected. But they met each problem with honesty and a shared determination. Their foundation grew stronger, not through perfection, but through perseverance. The moments that made their life rich were rarely the grand ones. They were the quiet ones. Vincent slipping his jacket around her shoulders on a chilly walk. Claire leaving handwritten notes in his coat pockets. Cooking dinner together at midnight after long days at work. Holding hands at traffic lights. Falling asleep on the couch during movie nights. Whispering reassurances when worry crept close. Learning how to apologize. Learning how to forgive. Every year, on the anniversary of his proposal, they visited the Morning Cup, the cafe where she once worked for tips and hope. The owners left the sign up in her honor even after it changed hands. It had become more than a building. It was part of their story. During their most recent visit, Vincent held her hand as they walked inside. The smell of coffee beans filled the air, familiar and comforting. Claire looked around at the small tables and the worn wooden counter where she once served impatient customers, where she once dreamed of a different life but didn't know how she'd ever reach it. Vincent pulled out a chair for her. "Hard to believe," he murmured. She nodded, her smile soft. "We came a long way." "From debt to devotion," he said quietly. She reached for his hand across the table. "Together," she replied. Outside, the city carried on, cars moving, people rushing, the steady hum of Chicago's rhythm. But inside that cafe, they sat with the understanding that everything they built came from choosing each other again and again. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And it was enough. Even after years of building their life together, the lessons Claire and Vincent learned remained as present as the morning sun spilling across their kitchen. Their story wasn't about wealth, power, or dramatic rescues. It was about genuine connection, the kind that grows quietly, steadily, and intentionally. Love, they realized, was not something that happened to a person. It was something you chose every day, in every word, every gesture, and every difficult decision. The courage required to transform didn't announce itself. It was found in late-night conversations, in vulnerability shared without fear, in small acts of honesty that could have been ignored but were not. Vincent had discovered that strength was not the ability to dominate or protect at a distance. It was the ability to stand alongside someone, to support them, to listen and change when needed. Claire had shown him that patience and persistence were more powerful than aggression. That kindness was not weakness but the foundation for lasting trust and respect. Together, they learned how to see potential in people who had been overlooked or underestimated, and in themselves, beyond what they had thought possible. On a warm evening behind Dawson's, their little garden thrived, a space filled with herbs, vegetables, and late-blooming flowers. Claire knelt in the soil, hands darkened with earth, planting basil seedlings for the week. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and thyme, mixed with the lingering scent of fresh bread from the restaurant inside. Vincent carried a tray with 2 glasses of lemonade, the condensation dripping onto the wooden surface. "You know," he said softly, placing a glass beside her, "this will never feel ordinary to me." She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Nothing about this is ordinary." They paused, sharing the quiet of the garden, the rustle of leaves, the soft hum of life around them. There was no grand speech, no dramatic declaration, just an understanding that had taken years to grow, that rescue had evolved into partnership, that dependence had become equality, that love had become a deliberate, lived practice. Vincent leaned back on the bench, watching Claire tuck a plant into place. He thought of everything that once defined him: money, influence, fear, respect earned through intimidation, and realized none of it compared to this, a life built slowly, steadily, with someone who had chosen to see him as more than his past. His wealth and power could not create the peace or joy that came from watching Claire smile over a row of thriving plants. It was a richness of the heart, a security in partnership that no business empire could match. Claire looked up at him, hand still in soil, and caught his gaze. In that simple exchange, no words were needed. Every shared glance, every small gesture, every day of choosing each other had created a language all their own. She felt a deep contentment in the life they had built together. Hardships had tested them, choices had been difficult, and yet, here they were, standing firmly in the middle of their own story. The sun began to lower toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city beyond. The skyline shimmered in the evening light, the lake reflecting fragments of color as if the world itself had slowed to watch. They sat side by side on the bench, glasses in hand, enjoying the quiet as the city moved around them, unaware, uncaring, and perfectly ordinary. Claire leaned against Vincent's shoulder, sighing softly. "Do you think people ever get this lucky?" Vincent pressed his lips to the top of her head. "I think we made our own luck. And we've been paying it forward every day since." They didn't need more than that. The lessons of their journey, the active choice of love, the strength found in vulnerability, the patience required to grow together, the kindness that shaped their world, were all embodied in that moment. A garden, a bench, a pair of people who had chosen each other over fear, over past obligations, over doubt. As the sun dipped further, turning the sky golden and soft purple, they stayed in silence, letting the city's pulse fade into the background. Each knew the story they had lived, the danger, the rescue, the slow unfolding of trust, was now part of the foundation of everything they would build from this point forward. They had learned that true connection could not be rushed or forced. It could only be nurtured, chosen, and honored every single day. Vincent finally spoke again, quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "All the power and wealth I've ever held meant nothing compared to this." Claire smiled, eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "And I don't need anything more than this life with you." They watched the sunset together over the Chicago skyline, hands entwined, hearts steady. And in that calm, in that simple, ordinary beauty, it became clear, love was the only debt worth owing. And theirs had been paid in full, every single day. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story dropping that you absolutely won't want to miss. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions help us continue bringing you these meaningful tales. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family.